We can start now.
All right. Okay, friends, I'm going to talk about on systems thinking and system dynamics modeling. And I'm going to take a case in point, which is basically the case of peak oil, which was my first encounter into the world of unsustainability. So let me begin now. Uh, First, I came across systems thinking in June 2007 at the Sadhana Center for Management and Leadership Development, Pune. And this college was conceived and run by late Professor M.S. Pillai, who was also the founder director for Symbiosis Center for Human Resource Development, after which he started Sadhana. And that's where I met Sushil Bajpayee and Rajendra Raina, who basically were my teachers, mentors, and friends over the period of time on systems thinking. This was the first slide that I ever saw on systems thinking. And even today, this remains my first slide when I stick a lecture on systems thinking at any place where I'm called. And I'll not tell you more about what this particular slide or image is because it is in store for you all to see later. And there is some kind of a lifetime memory that I have collected by interacting with Sushil sir and Rajendra Raina. But two things which stand out uh, is one is that I always remember that systems thinking and modeling is both art and science. That's what these two guys all would tell me always whenever I used to practice modeling and systems thinking, saying it's just not science and it's just not art. You have to learn the science and then you have to master the art through practice. And as all of you or some of you would know, that art is very difficult to teach, right? Every artist has to carve out it's his or her own way of making the art more appealing and beautiful. And then Mr. Rana would always say that if you are doing anything which you can do with joy, ease, and grace, then perhaps that is the purpose of your life, or you have found the purpose for which you were made or brought into this universe. And with certain confidence, I can say today that whatever I'm doing currently, I have a sense that I'm able to do it with joy, ease, and grace. And any and every time I have certain doubts, I go back to these two things which help me reflect on what is going on with me and my life now. My life has been fairly non-linear. I started with retail banking at HSBC, then moved to stock markets, spent less than a year there, uh, encountered the issue of peak oil while at stock markets. Uh, it kind of shook me up. And then I thought that, well, if this is a kind of a issue, what is the solution for this? And I realized that maybe we have to localize more. We need to live within a local boundary. And we'll talk about these things in today's presentation. So I thought of localization as a way of solving the issues of peak oil and energy crisis. And when you study energy, you also look at climate and other things. And that's when I joined Sushil sir at WOTR, worked at WOTR for 5 years in the climate change adaptation program that they were running, and worked on rural development also. Developed some tools and methods on how you can estimate local economies, do climate risk impact assessment. After working at WTR, I moved to Terry in Delhi. I worked on public policy issues, did plenty of applications of system dynamics modeling, systems thinking on public policy. Now I run my own research and consulting firm. It's a very small partnerships firm that I've set up with Kabir. And our only focus here is on collaborations. We want to expand the network of people who can think in systems. And all we do is we collaborate and we work and we collaborate and we work. And I don't know what's next. It's a question mark. That's not a big question mark. It's a small question mark there. Systems thinking is basically the common thread that weaves my life journey together. And it has helped me to improve my own understanding about things that are going on around me and in my life. And it has also helped me to listen to people better than what I used to before. We're going to talk about peak oil today as a case in point, and I'm going to also show you some models that I've built specifically for this session. If you have any questions in between, I requested Sushil sir to uh, take all those questions via the chat window or any other means that is available in Click Meeting. And after 30 minutes of me talking, we'll start the Q&A. So what is peak oil? It is basically when oil supplies are unable to keep up with the oil demand. It's as simple as that. Point in time when oil production reaches a global or local maximum and then goes into a terminal decline. Basically, when you can't increase the oil production anymore. But more importantly, basically, when you're left with no option but to accept the fact that it is indeed a non renewable resource. Because all your efforts are not really helping you increase the output of oil from any well. And you realize that, well, the oil well is not renewing itself. Hence, it's a finite resource. And the idea that you can continue to extract more and more forever is not really true. It was in July 2009. That's when I first encountered the idea of peak oil, because in the stock markets I was a fundamental analyst, which means I would look at the supply side dynamics of any resource, be it gold, silver, oil, gas, any other thing. And when I looked at specifically at oil as a commodity, I realized that the supply side dynamics of oil are very very crucial to understand to figure out what is going to happen in the future. And that's when I encountered this idea of limits to growth, saying, well, finite resources or even renewable resources have a certain limit of how much extraction you could do. That was my first introduction to the world of unsustainability. Before that, I was a believer in infinite growth. I used to think that growth is equal to prosperity. All those things turned on their head when I encountered this whole idea about limits to growth, climate, emissions, and things like that. And then I quit stock markets, worked at WTR, or thought of Sushil sir planted this idea in me that why don't you write a book? And I said, wow. And then I tried, and after a year or two, this publication came out, which is called Carbon Climax. The subtitle of this publication is more important for you all to remember. It says that it's a decade of metamorphosis and rapid change. This I published in 2011, and I thought that 2010 to 20 would be a decade. Then we would see rapid changes happening, partially attributable to also energy crisis. The origins of peak oil go way back. It basically goes back to 1956. That's when a paper came out saying nuclear energy and fossil fuels, where Hubbard, uh, who was a geologist in Shell company, he came up with this idea that all finite resources, especially oil, the production profile follows a bell curve, which means it will increase, reach a maximum, and then go into terminal decline. And he proposed this idea that all oil wells, will go into a decline, and a peak will come when approximately half the oil has been used up. So, what I'm going to say today or show you is nothing new. It has been here for close to 6 decades, or maybe even before that. And then as the market was flooded with many books, especially in and around 2004, 5, 7, 10. 7 and 9 was the time when the subprime crisis happened. The oil prices had reached $147 a barrel, and a lot of information literature came out on the net talking about peak oil. These are some of the books that I could Google, and there are many more. There's also a peak oil India group, uh, which is a kind of closed group of few people who work on this issue together. I'm going to present you a systems story about oil, and I'm going to show you some causal loop diagrams, or rather, let me show you this. So this is going to be the flow of presentation. I'll show you a reference mode, and I'll also tell you what it means in systems dynamics. I'll take you through a dynamic hypothesis, a simulation model. I'll run some simulations, and then we'll move to question and answer. I am hoping that I'll be able to go through all the 4 points in the next 20-25 minutes so that we are left with enough time to do Q&A. So what is a reference mode for a peak oil? Reference modes is basically what do you expect the dynamic behavior of the problem to be in history and in future. What do you expect it would be? So what we do is we make a graph which shows the behavior over time of a specific variable, which in this case is basically oil production. And this is what the 1957 paper showed, that the bell-shaped curve showed that you can extract more and more oil, and then it will reach a maximum and then go into a terminal decline. So that's a reference mode that King Hubbard drew through his research. And this is a modern adapted version of that, saying as more oil wells are discovered, the peak keeps getting shifted in the future because now you have more oil to produce. And here you see this is called the energy curve of history, which basically shows the entire fossil fuel production that we can ever achieve over an extended time horizon. It talks about 4,000 years of time frame. And this is what really rattles people, because in geological terms, we don't talk about a decade or few months. We're talking about centuries. So it says that the amount of fossil fuels that we'll be able to extract will rapidly go up, then reach a maximum, and then perhaps go into a decline. And if you sum it up, all of it, it becomes a blip if you expand the time horizon. It really becomes a blip in the history of Earth's biology. And then there was a famous line that I found on Life After the Oil Crash, which says that the industrial era may not be anything more than a blip in the history of all life on Earth. And this is the blip in which we are living right now. So let me now move on to Stella, and I will project my Stella models and take you through the story of peak oil and how you can understand it using systems thinking. Sushil sir, just quickly tell me if you can see my Stella model. This is visible, right?
It's visible. That's your model is visible. That's all right. It's visible. I can see it.
Okay. All right. So the feedback loops in the oil landscape goes something like this: that there is a discoverable oil in Earth, which is lying underground. And as you discover oil, the feedback goes back, and the discoverable oil on Earth comes down. So imagine this to be like a tank which has oil in it. And then as you dig into the tank, you discover oil. And as you discover oil, the oil left in the tank goes down. And this is a polarity which you would have come across by now. A plus polarity means both the variables move in the same direction. They both go up or both go down. A negative polarity means they move in the opposite direction. So higher the discoverable oil in Earth, higher the possibility of discovering oil. The more you do a discovery, the less oil is remaining in Earth. And this sign here is called delay sign, which means that the first oil well that you drill will not lead to a substantial depletion of oil in Earth. Hence, the more you discover over time, faster is the depletion. But there is a time delay here. And this is called a balancing loop, which basically means that it keeps the system in check. It does not allow the system to move in one direction for a very long time. It does not allow the system to amplify or grow or degrow. So that's the first balancing loop there. Now, as you discover oil, you classify them as reserves. And through these reserves, you produce oil. So higher the oil reserves, higher the production. But higher the production, lower is your reserves that you're left with. Lower the reserves, lower the production over time. That's another balancing loop here, which means that you cannot always continue to increase the production over a very long period of time because the reserves are getting depleted. So what do we do now? We earn profits from the oil that we produce. We sell it in the market. And more production leads to more sales and hence more profits. More profits can then motivate you to do more investments to discover more oil. And as you discover more oil, your reserves are then replenished. And that's how you sustain your business. Or that's how the oil companies can sustain or reinforce the growth of their business. So higher the discovery, higher the reserves, higher the production, higher the profits, higher the investments, higher the discovery. And this is what is the reinvestment cycle for any oil company. The investments does not directly lead to oil discovery, hence there is also a delay because it's a probabilistic game. So it takes years to discover an oil well, develop it, and then commence it for production. Now comes the question of price. So as discovery goes up, your prices start going down because now there is a surplus oil that is available. Also, if your discoveries are falling, that means the cost of discovering oil is going up. So lower the discovery, higher the price. Higher the price, higher the production. Because if prices go up, companies want to make profits. Higher the production, higher the profits and surplus, higher the investments, and then more the discovery. More the discovery, less the prices. Hence, prices move in a oscillation. It's not that prices only continue to go up or only company continue to go down. It's another balancing loop. It keeps the prices under check. However, as we increase our production and as we gain more profits and reinvest as we discover more oil, the amount of oil remaining in earth goes down, and that's what limits over time our ability to discover more oil. And that's when prices really start going up and then reach a new normal. With that, we end up producing more, which does nothing else but leads to further depletion of oil and further increase in price. Now, as prices go up, it also leads to more reserves becoming viable, which means that the difficult oil that you did not have access to earlier is now available. And that means the classification of reserves changes. The difficult oil is now available for you at higher prices. That means your production can further go up. Again, investments go up. You end up trying to discover more oil, which ultimately depletes the ultimate resource on earth. So there are four balancing loops in this model, which means that there are serious limits to how much you can grow this system. And there is one reinforcing loop, which is trying to increase the business growth. Now, this is a check in the system saying if discovery is more, price is less, reserves cannot be classified, hence maybe production could be curtailed. Similarly, if prices are more, reserves go up, production goes up, profits goes up, investments goes up, discovery goes up, and then again prices comes down. So this is the hack that prices gives you. It can make you just increase your reserves. And if you look at the historical data of reserves of oil, the reserves are going up even if discovery has not gone up, which means earlier unviable oil is becoming viable. So there are different balancing loops which are interacting with each other and trying to manage the system. But this reinforcing loop is our vision. We want growth. And that's why every time we attempt a growth loop, these balancing loops kick in, and give us a feedback. And then through price, we again manipulate the system to try to increase our production. And then again, it comes back and gives a feedback saying, well, we don't have enough oil left. So the discoveries are getting difficult and prices are going down. So that's a dynamic hypothesis. A dynamic hypothesis tells the story of the model or the system with only very few loops. It does not tell you the details of the parameters. The details of the parameters comes into the simulation model, which I will now project. So this is the story of the simulation model, the stock flow model. So as we have seen, there is a discoverable oil in earth, which is a finite stock. It does not have an inflow there, which means it's non-renewable. Discoverable oil on earth is discovered through a process of exploration, and that gets converted into a possible, probable, and proven reserves, which is basically 3P, as it is popularly called. Now, that doesn't mean that all of this can be produced, right? And then it gets classified as a 1P reserve, which means it's proven and it's recoverable. And from here, the production is commenced. And that's when the flow of oil starts coming into the market, even at retail levels. And then we have a stock of how much oil we have ever produced. You can't just keep discovering all of the oil that is left in the earth, because as the stock depletes over time, it impacts the rate of discovery, which is a balancing loop that I had shown you earlier. The more the depletion, the harder it is to discover. And there's a normal rate of classification saying, okay, I have just discovered oil well, and there is some initial oil in place there. I've estimated it to be, say, X, but not all of it can be commenced for production, right? So there's a normal rate of classification that is taken at around 40%, saying 40% of the total discovery can commence into a production. And that's what then flows into another stock, which is proven recoverable reserves. And then there are some economically unviable reserves at current prices, saying, okay, maybe we can take out 40% of this at current prices, remaining are potential reserves, and they will stay there. So that's the core difference between a 1p reserve and a 3p reserve. A 3p reserve will have a higher number, but that doesn't mean all of that can come on board for production. But companies are very attached to 3p reserves showing up on their balance sheet because it basically helps them increase their own valuations of the enterprise, because this is the asset on which they function. Now, there are potential reserves which are lying there, waiting to kick in as prices go up. However, some of it will be lost forever because it is either too deep to extract, uh, it has high viscosity, it is very heavy, it is dirty, it requires too much energy to take out and then commence for production. So some bit of oil will always be left in earth. We will never be able to take it out. And then there is a rate of production which is very, very dynamic in nature, which leads to the flow of oil being produced. Now, this production helps you earn profits, right? Because there is a price. Now, as the price changes, it has an impact on production. And that's why I'm calling it a dynamic rate of production. Now, the profits that you earn are also invested back into the company, which is capital. And there's an investment fraction. The green ones are the ones on which you have control, right? And we'll do some simulation experiments by changing these green variables, saying what is the fraction you want to invest back. And as you invest, the capital that is invested is helping you in developing your oil wells or discovering more oil. But there is also a capital lifetime, and because of which your capital is depreciated over time. So this completes the feedback loop that I had shown you earlier, the reinforcing loop, saying more discovery, more reserves, more production, more profits, more investments, more discovery. And there is, as the discovery goes down, there is an impact on the oil price, which then comes back and impacts the profits and how much you're producing. As your oil prices changes, it has an impact on your reserves, saying how much can now become viable for production. And those which we had earlier classified as potential reserves then come in to becoming proven recoverable reserves. And from there also you can start producing oil. So it's completely dependent on price and how economically viable it is to start producing these. So that's the entire model that I have. And I will do some simulation runs here. Sushil sir, how do you want to do it? Should I pause here for some questions, or I do my complete simulation runs and then we come back to it later?
Just a moment. Let me get a sensing from people. Can you please indicate quickly whether we can continue with the presentation, or do you want to pause? It may be better. We'll just wait for a couple of 15 seconds to get some sensing.
Sure. Any clarificatory questions? Anything that you want me to clarify?
Anything that is unclear at this moment, that's what you can probably put.
Yeah.
Okay, while people put their thoughts together, Dharmaraj has already run the model in his head. He thinks that renewable variables not impacting much. Yeah, your comment on that?
What is it saying? What is he saying? Renewables?
Renewables are not impacting much. That's what he
Not
said.
impacting much.
Renewables, variables not impacting much. And there's a question mark. It's a question saying, are they renewable?
Okay, are you saying that renewables as a renewable source of energy is not featuring in this model? Is that what you're saying?
I am not very clear about the question, but yeah, he says, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So this session is not specifically on energetics or things like that, because that will take me longer to go through the entire
Let me
process.
put it this way.
But
the other forms of energy are beyond the boundary of the model in question at this moment. We are discussing only energy out of oil coming out from Earth. Okay, I think we can continue so that we don't
Let's
break
do
the
that.
flow.
All right. Now I'm going to run the model, and we'll see if it is able to produce the reference modes that I had shown you before. Or do all of you remember the reference modes? If not, I can project it once again. These were the reference modes that we have found in literature, the bell-shaped curve, right? And I'll run the model and see if this model that I've set up is anywhere close to producing those. Let me run it very slowly so that we all see what is happening here. I'm running the model from 1880 till 2100. Right. I'm going to project the production curve. Yes, all of you can see the oil production curve. It starts really, really slow and then increases over time, reaches a maximum, and then goes into a terminal decline. This is pretty much similar to the reference modes that we had seen as available in literature. Now, the question is that if this is what we are seeing, and if oil has become uh, an essential resource for sustaining the modern world, because it is oil which also helps us develop fertilizers, pesticides, helps you transport your seeds and agriculture equipments, and then also produce food, and that food also travels back to us in cities. So oil is essential for food that we eat. Oil is essential for the clothes that we wear. Oil is essential to run transport systems. So if oil is such an essential commodity for us, can we afford to see such a sharp decline in oil production anytime? Anytime, whenever it happens. It did not happen today, tomorrow, or as this model is showing by 2028. But anytime it happens, can we afford this? And what are the ways of coming around this or avoiding this decline? We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's look at another dynamic behavior of the stock. This is the stock, which is non-renewable stock, a finite resource, the total discoverable oil on Earth, which I have pegged at around 3 trillion barrels of oil. It shows a inverse S-shaped curve, which is a very classical dynamics of behavior of a resource stock, a non-renewable resource stock. The decline is very slow, so perhaps for the first 100 years, the decline is around 10%, 10 to 15%. So for 100 years, you wouldn't even realize, say, what is going on. And I can roll back the simulation. Okay, it's not rolling back here. Here it is. I can do it like this, yeah. So up to 1980, from 1880 to 1980, you wouldn't even realize what is going on here because the depletion is around 10 to 15%. But in the next 30 years, you see an exponential fall of the resource base, and it has gone beyond half. So more than 50% of it is gone in the next 30 years. And then what is happening after that in the next 15 years is basically exponential decay or collapse of the non-renewable resource. And this is reflected in the discovery of oil, where we are discovering a lot, and then suddenly uh, there is a cliff through which we fall, and then we are discovering less and less over time. That doesn't mean that we are not investing enough to discover new oil fields. If you look at the capital which is invested, it is just continuously going up. Every time the discovery is falling around here, our capital stock is actually going up. So we're investing more and more, but we're finding less and less. And that's what gets reflected in the oil price, saying as we find less and less of oil, it will become more and more expensive for us to use, for us to be able to purchase and sell. Because simply put, the capital investments for discovering new oil is very high. So the reserves get depleted because you can't discover more as you were able to do earlier. Uh, Even with a higher oil price and Now new oil can come on board, which was previously classified as potential. Hmm. So the impact of price on recoverability of reserves has gone up, but even then, it is leading to a fast depletion of the potential reserves because all of that is now getting classified as proven recoverable reserves. And now here you see some respite. The bell-shaped curve is very uniformly distributed, which means the peak comes, and then the decline is gentle. It is not as harsh as these shapes. That's mainly because more and more of the potential reserves are slowly coming on board as prices are going up. And that is one of the reasons why very often peak oil forecasts have gone wrong, because economics is trying to artificially uh, interfere and spoil the game. And is spoiling the game by through a very virtual way of doing it. Higher prices means more oil is available. Well, it's not. It does not really mean that more oil is available. It just means that previously unrecoverable oil can now be recovered because the costs are very high to do it, but people are ready to pay because oil is an essential commodity for you to survive, and that's why the prices can really go up. And I've given a factor here that it can perhaps go up 10 times, which is very unreal, which also implies that if it goes up by 10 times, who's going to buy it? In this model, due to model boundary conditions, I have not factored in demand or the elasticity of demand to keep things relatively simple, because we want to focus on the supply side. So as compared to these two stocks, which are depleting faster, this stock is not depleting faster because it is also getting replenished through the additional stock, which is potential reserves, which kicks in later as compared to this. And then there is a production profile which goes up and then goes down. Here, if you see total oil produced, we can never produce as much oil as there is in Earth. Not all of that is producible. Some bit of that will always be left in Earth. And if you read popular literature, it says that around one third of all the oil that we ever thought is there, we will never be able to produce because it will just be unviable to produce it due to energy economics, due to environmental problems, and due to simply pricing elasticity, which will break at very high levels. So that's the business as usual behavior, the reference mode. The reserves and surplus goes up and then goes down, which means your profitability also peaks. Although you are draining your reserves and surplus to discover more and more oil, but you can't discover more oil because of geological reasons. And companies go in losses or find out that maybe oil is not the commodity that they should be focusing. And that's where Dharmraj's point comes in, saying, where are the renewables? How do we substitute this commodity with others? And that's a different kind of exercise and a question for which you have to build a different kind of a model. A quick note on model here is that you should never build a model which can answer all questions. That's not the purpose of modeling. A model is not supposed to tell you any and everything about reality, because sometimes models can become as complex as the real world. And then the question is, what is the usefulness of the model if it is as complex as the real world? Because you make models to answer to certain questions which otherwise you cannot answer by yourself. And hence you take help of models. So you must always have questions that your model should respond to, questions that your model should answer. And then that becomes the guiding light, saying how much will you model? Will you model oil? Will you model shale oil? Will you model nuclear, wind, biomass? What will you do? Where will you stop? And that's when we come back and say, well, one model is not supposed to model everything and answer everything. You need to have questions that a model should answer. Okay, I will dock this so that we can see comparative runs. Now, quickly, I'll take you in next 3 minutes. I'll take you through some scenarios or policy scenarios, saying, fine, if you had more time, I would have done a role-playing game and set up this model differently through an interface. Anyways, I would say if I'm the company, a classical way of overcoming this problem is I'll just increase my production because my production is peaking and going down. So if I increase my production rate, you see what is happening here? I increase my normal production rate and I can produce more. So I've definitely solved the issue of peaking at this level. But what I don't realize is that if I produce more, I'm depleting the resource faster. I'm depleting the resource faster, so the peak is coming faster, and the peak is higher. Higher the peak, higher the fall, right? From the from the peak of production. So just increasing the production does not really help me sustain my business for long. In fact, it reduces the lifespan of my business, right? My reserves and surpluses are getting depleted faster. So this doesn't look like a feasible way of overcoming the issue of peaking of oil production. What else can I do? Maybe I can invest more in developing my oil fields faster or discovering more oil, and that will help me overcome this issue of peaking. So I increase my investment fraction. And as I increase my investment fraction, I see that I'm seeing the same behavior that I saw while I increase my production rate. This also doesn't help me overcome the issue of peaking. On the contrary, it is expediting the problem that I'm going to see in future. Doesn't work. What else should we do? People say prices. Prices are going to help you manage scarcity, right? That's what they say. Increase the prices. If I increase the prices, again, the economic law of economics says that higher the price, higher the supply, and that's why my production goes up. But if my production goes up, we have already seen that the peak will come faster. That's because I'm discovering faster and I'm depleting the stock at a faster pace. And if I'm depleting the stock at a faster pace, I'm also going to hit the limits very soon. What should we do is the question. Now, this is where the counterintuitiveness of system dynamics comes in. What if, and I'm quoting Jay Forrester and perhaps Donald Meadows here, saying that people always are able to spot the levers in the system. People are always able to spot the leverages in the system, which is to do with investment fraction, which is to do with oil price. But unfortunately, very often, people turn the lever in the wrong direction. The leverage is in investments, the leverage is in price, the leverage is in the rate of production. Unfortunately, we're just pushing it in the wrong direction. So let me push it in the opposite direction. What if I reduced the rate of my investments and the rate at which I develop these oil fields? If I reduce the rate of investments, I see that my peak is going further in time. It has particularly vanished for this entire century, right? If I reduce my investment fractions, if I reduced the oil prices, I could sustain my business for a longer period of time, right? I have to sacrifice growth there, but I can in return I can get sustainability of some sort. I can sustain my business for a longer period of time. What if I reduce my rate of production without changing profitability? I can sustain for a longer period of time. You see, I still continue to earn profits. I can invest more, and I can run my business for a longer period of time. However, these are not easy insights to get. Even more harder to implement. If I run an oil company and if this model is shown to me, this will make me very uncomfortable, saying, well, look, you have to reduce your prices. Look, you have to reduce our investment fractions into developing oil fields. Much before you have depleted the oil fields. And that's the tricky part, saying, how do you develop a foresight about a situation which is going to arise in future? And how do you take a counterintuitive insight and make it implementable? And that's where role of models comes in. That's where role of system dynamics comes in. The role of models and systems thinking and system dynamics is to make people go through the experience of what the complexity of the real world could look like, and then learn about their decision-making practices, and then reorient their decision-making practices and assumptions about the causations that they think is going on in the real world, and test some of their decision-making abilities. I think for me, that has been the primary and the biggest contribution of systems thinking and system dynamics. Today, when we do professional projects for people, we use systems thinking and modeling more as conversational tools, saying, can we talk about the dynamics of change over time from a more systemic point of view? Can we contemplate about the future possibilities using models? Can we improve our understanding about our own assumptions about what goes into the models and the real world operations? And can we help each other test our assumptions and learn more about each other's viewpoints? This piece is central while developing a collaboration or developing alliances. Even at times of COVID, if alliances have come together, and respond, they need to understand what is their common worldview through a kind of a tool, through a model. All of us use models in our minds, but systems thinking helps us do it more formally. And that makes it more transparent, verifiable, visual, adaptable. It also a store of memory. Saying, well, 2 weeks back I was thinking like this, but now I have changed it. Which shows you that you have learned something and it's easier to share. Right. So I can go on and on about the model, but I'll pause here. And if you have some questions, I'll be happy to discuss. And I would love to hear what Sushil sir, Raina sir, and others have to say here.
That was brilliant,
Thank you
Mihir.
very much.
And now we are ready. Well, this we have, I think, already answered
Yeah.
here. Okay? And renewables, in fact, are not as renewable as they pretend to be. Let me tell you this very clearly. And one of the things about peak oil is that it's not just about peak oil, it is about peak of lithium. So we can try to get lithium batteries, but we will run out of lithium very soon in the same fashion as peak oil. They speak water. They speak of everything, really, honestly. And there is, it's only that we try to sort of console ourselves. There are renewable energies and renewable resources. Honestly speaking, there is nothing renewable, and we will get to that on one of the other presentations, perhaps. There is here, can we introduce black swan events in such models?
Yeah, you can. System dynamics modeling gives you plenty of flexibility to do those such things. If somebody can understand a black swan or identify a black swan event, communicate to us, we can input it as equations or maybe as a pulse function, saying once over a time a black swan event comes, which had happened in 1970s, the embargo and other things, and that starts and that disrupts the market or the smooth curves that you're seeing and things like that. So black swans can be introduced using different functionalities in Stella.
There is an interesting question coming up here, Mihir. If the prices are reduced, wouldn't the demand go up and hence faster depletion?
Now, yeah, I had not factored in demand in the model, but there are two microeconomics talks about two things, saying higher the prices, higher the supply, higher the prices, lower the demand, and the vice versa, saying lower the prices, higher the demand. Now you're right. At lower prices, demand will go up, and that will lead to faster depletion. Now depletion happens from supply, not from demand, right? So at lower prices, companies don't want to produce more because they're not breaking even, right? So if lower prices happens and demand goes up temporarily, rest assured the prices will also go back because there's a feedback loop going on there, and it's a balancing feedback loop, which means if demand goes up, supplies also come on board, and then that adjusts the demand supply gap, and then the prices are changed over time, right? So the balancing feedback loop will always keep the prices under check. It's not that prices will always remain low or always remain high, because at too high prices in 2008, this happened. At $147 a barrel, we saw a demand contraction. The demand contracted by around 4 to 6 million barrels a day. That's substantial contraction for a commodity which is basically essential for living today, right? We say demand is inelastic for such commodities, but still we saw a correction. So if the prices go down, which it has now, and demand goes up, you will surely see a correction in the prices also. So a depletion could happen only when the supply is increased for a long period of time. Sushil, so you want to add anything here?
Yeah, there are multiple factors. It is not only about just reducing the prices, because once we reduce the price, lots of other dynamics will kick in. And also, the cost and price are not really related. That is another thing that we need to consider. They never are. And while you're quite right that if you just simply reduce the price, it will factor in. But if you reduce the price, you will start also remember that you will start going out of business because you will not be able to control your cost. and therefore you will produce less, see, automatically. So it's just one of the insights that the model is giving me. Uh, if a producer starts asking a question saying, what happens if I keep the prices constant? Then what is likely to happen? Etc. So very valid question. We'll move to next question now. How to factor unseen variables in the model? Like in current situation, there are news where oil prices have gone negative. When we should think or feel that the model is final and act accordingly. Yeah.
So
Pradnya, you
I'll
must buy
borrow
some
what.
very expensive cars, probably, see, giving you 1 kilometer to a liter, see, and earn money while the prices are negative.
Or short the markets. Anyways, uh, you see, models are a simplification of reality. So if you think that model is final and you will act by looking at what the model is saying, then that's a risk that you should take, and you should be held accountable for that, not modelers. Because modelers like me will always tell you that this is a simplification of reality and is meant to help you test your assumptions. And there are many unseen variables that the model will never be able to capture, because real world is made up of complex adaptive systems. Our behaviors, our decision making rules change over time, right? How can a model factor in what changes is going on in my mind right now? The model is non-adaptive in that sense. It's people who think through the models, and then people who learn come back and adapt the models, gives the model an adaptability over time. And when you do that, you learn about the real world and then act accordingly, right? The model is never final. The model is a tool for you to think out of the box, and possibly also identify some black swan events which may not have taken place, and possibly also think the unthinkable, and then do a smart act. Like in 1970s, I remember when the embargo happened, it was Shell who had recruited a MBA who brought this scenario planning exercise into the field of oil world. And through a scenario planning exercise, they they thought about a extreme condition where if embargo happens, what could happen, and that's how they minted the money while many other companies lost the money. But that doesn't mean that that scenario was the only truth that the company was going to take into account and act. So models have a specific purpose, and then there are things which happen outside the model which are real, and people do it. And models becomes your tools for doing that. Okay, and not an end in itself.
But nevertheless, a fantastic question. Next question
So you want to
from,
add anything here?
yeah. I think an assumption for the model was that the leadership in the industry is unipolar, but with different companies pushing each other, the foresight will be extremely hard to implement unilaterally. Also, I think the industry is looking at this in game theory terms as finite game, and hence for each company, it's a race to collapse, race to the bottom. Yep, we've heard of race to the bottom phenomena earlier. Maybe your comments, Mihir. Have we lost you, Mihir?
I don't have a doubt here. If people
Yeah.
like me could understand in a B school. No, I'm there. Can you hear me? Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that people have known this for many ages before I discovered in 2009. And if a person like me sitting in a small stock trading firm, stock market firm, can figure this out, I'm sure many people have figured it out who are in the business of oil production. So they know this game. The game is known to investors, large hedge funds also. And they have a way of operating and reaching out or playing out the end game also. Now, here, this is where we are now getting into kind of a conspiracy theory and other things, uh, where we think that people know that the end is near or the collapse is there, and they're playing a game on how you run the tide on the downside and still come out stronger. Only for few people this is valid, not for everyone, people like you and me. So that's true, and that's why we saw a lot of consolidation also happening in the oil and gas sector. We hardly have like 5 to 7 large giant players in the world, and not 200 companies who can survive this game, because the game is reaching an end game, and more consolidation happens. That's one way of uh, for them to sustain the collapse. But I would stop
Asking
here
a
on
lot
this
of
question,
questions.
mine right now. But
Yeah,
I would love to hear what Sushil has to say.
yeah, that's quite right. We have repeatedly said models are simplification of reality. See, people will behave in ways which would result, and when we talk about archetypes, we will also see it's the commons, see, and they get impacted. And obviously, nearly always these kind of things result in tragedy of the commons, and that is more appropriate here. And that's
Yeah, and
uh,
it's actually a known tragedy of commons. It's not rocket science. When you
yeah.
talk about renewability, yeah, it's a known tragedy of commons. A classical tragedy of commons of a grasslands or a forest, or a forest, is when you can't figure out that the tragedy is happening, because it's a renewable resource. It's a fast renewable resource. So that's where you have to really get into the systems piece and figure out through archetypes and other models that what is the carrying capacity of the system. Are we overstocking? Are we depleting the renewable resource? In this case, it's a non-renewable resource. Perhaps the tragedy of commons is very well orchestrated. It's just that it is not commonly known or very explicitly known to common people like me and you.
And we still can't hear Mr. Rana. He would have, I'm sure he would have had very nice things to say about you, Mehid. Mm, mm.
I wanted to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sure you wanted to hear that. So did
Okay,
I. But I
absolutely.
think we will have to wait for his praise or words of praise later on the forum or on the group. Mm.
ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है.
And thanks a lot, Mehir. And we will make this.
I can do one. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to say some concluding remarks, Mehir?
Yeah. Just one thing. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Can all of you? Yeah. So I just wanted to say that peak oil must be seen only as an event, and not a fundamental structure of the problem that we are trying to figure out. The problem here is of limits to growth in a finitely renewable world. And I would encourage you all to read on limits to growth in the system dynamics literature and other places. It essentially talks about how much growth can be achieved in a world which is finite, even if you have renewable resources like grass or wood, hmm, and other things. So it at a peak oil, if you really look at it from an energetics point of view or an energy return on energy invested point of view and you go deeper, it will start asking very, very fundamental questions. And when first Sushil sir had presented peak oil to me in college, 2007-8, the in, in doing something about it, I turned vegetarian, saying, the uh, energy footprint of non-vegetarian diet is very high, so let me do my bit, and I turned vegetarian for good 2-3 years, till I realized that even agriculture has a very high energy footprint, which is going up because of intensification of agriculture. And then I started questioning everything around me as a civilization, and I realized what fragile grounds we have constructed this modern world. So if you look at peak oil not just as oil prices or saying what is the date for peak oil, but if you go deeper into the energetics and how the world operates through the laws of thermodynamics, or just look at the economics of it and things, you'll start. It's really a journey for a lifetime that you have to do and question your own belief systems and things that you believe to be true. And thanks to Sushil sir and Raina sir for doing this to for me.
Thank you, Mihir. I am almost turning red and feeling a bit embarrassed now. Hey, uh, thanks very
Okay,
much. But I think the
thank you.
important lesson here is this becomes a starting point because there are linkages and very strong linkages between monetary system, between the renewables, non-renewables, what we call renewables, whether they are actually renewables or they are not renewables. That itself is a question because very often what we think is renewed can be renewed is not renewable at all. And one of the things that I keep hearing always is water is a renewable resource, and water is, it may be at global level it can be sometimes renewable. It's not renewable. Okay? And that's the fallacy we get into. See? And we also realize that these fallacies can be sometimes illustrated by modeling, sometimes by deep conversations. And like Mihir said, one of the things that we are trying to achieve with models is to expose our mental models more clearly and be able to discuss model. Then we are not offending anyone. We are not offending ourselves. We are talking model. Everything is projected on the model. And thank you very, very much, Mihir. I'm sure this session everybody would have liked very much. Recordings will be available, and uh, I will give a non-edited recording of this session. Thank you very,
Thank
very
you.
much. And
Unstated
Thanks a
I'm
lot.
things.
most of the people are saying thank you. Okay.
Please
Thanks
do.
very much.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Um,
Thank you, everyone.
have a
Thanks a
nice
lot.
day, and
Thank you.
we'll get back.
See
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
See you. Thanks. Thanks again very much, Mihir.
My pleasure always.